Hey all, it's Fox. I want to talk about whether or not our consciousness survives our bodily death. You may remember a few years ago, Robert Bigelow, American businessman and founder of Bigelow Aerospace, held a contest with a hefty prize, $1 million for anyone who could provide the best evidence that our consciousness survives our bodily death. The winner of the prize was Jeffery Mishlove, the only person to have ever received a doctorate in parapsychology from a major American university. He earned his doctorate at the University of California. Mishlove entered the contest with a paper he entitled, Beyond the Brain, the Survival of Human Consciousness After Permanent Bodily Death. I have spent a considerable amount of time with this paper and want to explore it here with you. Mishlove says that his passion for the paranormal was formed following a bizarre personal experience, an after-death communication where he dreamed of a conversation with his uncle the moment he died. Mishlove wrote, "It was a peaceful death. My great-uncle Harry Schwamm passed away on March 26, 1972. He died in Sheboygan, Wisconsin at age 84. A religiously observant man, he ran a small corner grocery store. He came home after attending early Sunday morning religious services, sat down in his favorite chair, and passed away. In California, it was 2 hours earlier, 7:30 a.m. I was sleeping, captured by and absorbed in the most surprising, vivid, and powerful dream of my life. Uncle Harry appeared and spoke to me about my life, addressing personal issues in a way that penetrated me to the core. I cannot say I knew Harry well during his life. He was over 50 years my senior. I was 25 years old. Yet, in this dream that seemed more real than waking reality, we shared a soul-to-soul communion that defied description. I awoke and wept, crying joyful tears and simultaneously singing a Hebrew song normally reserved for the most sacred Jewish observances. Something profoundly beautiful and transformative had touched me. Neither before nor since have I had a dream embodying such an intensely sublime emotional state. Due to this experience, Mishlove concluded that there was only one reasonable explanation. His Uncle Harry actually came to him in a dream after he died. Absolute proof that consciousness survives bodily death. Well, at least for Mishlove. Among some of Mishlove's stronger arguments is the fact that the belief in the post-mortem survival of consciousness is common to every culture, nationality, religion, and linguistic group in every region and historical period on Earth. He goes on to list a number of prominent individuals in relatively recent history who were convinced our consciousness survives bodily death, including Sir William Crookes, who discovered the element thallium, Sir Oliver Lodge, holder of key patents for radio, Caesar Lombroso, father of modern criminology, and Camille Flammarion, astronomer and author, among others. He argues that the reason why postmortem survival is not widely accepted in the scientific world is due to scientism, the unquestioned belief that the mechanistic, materialistic worldview, which works well for technology, can provide us with a complete explanation of everything. Mishlove writes, "This modernist, materialist ethos has incorporated an unfounded presumption of non-survival. Yet, both contemporary and historical evidence consistent with perennial experience certainly rebuts this blinding prejudice." Now, you can have a conversation about whether or not consciousness survives bodily death without talking about what consciousness actually is. Mishlove asserts that the belief that consciousness is a product of neurological activity remains an unconfirmed hypothesis, and I and anyone else who has spent even a little bit of time thinking about it has to admit this is true. It leads me to conclude that if you believe that consciousness survives our bodily death, then you have to believe that consciousness can survive without physical neurological activity. It can't be any other way. So, I look to conversations like this whenever I ponder consciousness. I tend to believe we are receivers and decoders of consciousness. Our brain is like a radio receiving a signal. Where the signal comes from, I don't know, but I suspect what we experience is but a sliver of a higher communal consciousness, a vast ocean that some may call God. So, taking that a little further, we are all but slivers of God. Mishlove's paper systematically dismantles arguments against the survival of consciousness after death, while also providing his best evidence that it does. It's an enthralling read. I've placed a link to his paper in the description box below. For hard proof, Mishlove discusses several phenomena including near-death experiences, after-death communications, reincarnation, peak and daring experiences, possession, instrumental communication, xenoglossy, mental mediumship, and physical mediumship. Mishlove believes that these 9 distinct domains, when they are all taken into consideration, presents evidence that he says is virtually invincible. I am not going to go into everything, but I find his strongest evidence involves his discussions on near-death experience and reincarnation, and his weakest evidence involves things like physical mediumship. Xenoglossy, for example, is the paranormal phenomena in which a person is allegedly able to speak, write, or understand a foreign language that they could not have acquired by natural means, meaning a person's language skills somehow transferred to them via reincarnation or other paranormal means. I think this topic on its own is worthy of an entirely different video, so for this video I'm going to focus on Mishlove's best evidence, which I believe to be his research into after-death communications, near-death experiences, and reincarnation. I also want to highlight an idea that was new to me and maybe new to you: peak and Darien experiences. First, Mishlove cites several examples of after-death communications. I will share a few here. Mishlove writes about British neuroscientist Peter Fenwick, who investigated after-death communications and found that these communications typically occur close to the moment of death. He wrote, Fenwick describes an incident when a drowned sailor in England appeared to his mother in Australia. He appeared dripping wet at the end of her bed in the middle of the night. Moving toward her, he became surrounded by light. He told her he was fine and then left. When she checked with the Navy, she learned her son had fallen overboard and drowned at the time he had appeared to her. Mishlove says that one does not need to be sleeping, meditating, experiencing an out-of-body state, or having a medical crisis to experience an after-death communication. He cites the story of psychologist Joseph Gallenberger, who had an after-death communication while showering. Mishlove wrote, he was at a Monroe Institute Lifeline program where participants learned various meditations to facilitate after-death communications. There, he endeavored to receive a message from an attendee's deceased wife. Later, in the shower, he experienced her spirit showing him a red and white checkered tablecloth. He even received specific information, including page 238 in a particular book. He later learned from the husband that they used to have weekly picnics with the tablecloth. The page citation was the favorite poem they used to read together. If it were not for the specific information received, the page number in the book, I would have chalked this experience up as a possible hallucination or waking dream, inspired by the workshop he was attending. However, how would you explain the particular book cited and page number? Now, let's talk about near-death experiences, or NDEs. NDEs are much more common than what people may think. Mishlove cites 5 different studies of cardiac patients in hospitals by Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel, author of Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of Near-Death Experience. The studies involved 562 patients who survived cardiac arrest and concluded that between 10 and 20% of patients had a near-death experience. Among this cohort, many had common experiences typical of near-death experiences, including out-of-body experiences, life reviews, a sense of indescribable love, near-death healing power, and even seeing the future. He provides the example of a woman named Elizabeth Crone who reported receiving extensive precognitive knowledge during an NDE. She received knowledge of the 1988 George H.W. Bush presidential election outcome and knew that the Cincinnati Bengals would play in the 1989 Super Bowl. I have to question why a higher power would share information about the future that is so benign. What possible purpose could it serve other than proving to the experiencer that time is not what we perceive it to be in our daily lives? That very well may be the underlying message. Now, let's talk about peak and Darien experiences. Mishlove explained, the term peak and Darien refers to a province in the Isthmus of Panama. When early Spanish explorers climbed a mountain peak there, it surprised them because they had arrived from the Atlantic side to discover a view of the Pacific Ocean. Now, peak and Darien has come to mean a surprising deathbed or near-death vision or after-death communication involving a person not believed to be deceased. Mishlove said that through his research he found that some 40% of near-death reports include encounters with a deceased loved one. He cites several examples, but the one I found to be most interesting is this one. Mishlove wrote about a young nurse's death as told by a fellow researcher, Bruce Grayson. Grayson describes a man in South Africa hospitalized with a respiratory disease. He had become friendly with a young nurse. One day she told him she was taking a long weekend off. The next day he had a respiratory arrest and had to be resuscitated, during which he had a near-death experience. He saw himself in a pastoral scene when the nurse, Anita, came walking toward him. He asked her why she was there. She replied saying, "I'm here now, but you cannot stay. You need to go back. I want you to tell my parents I love them and I'm very sorry I wrecked the MGB." Then she turned and walked away. It turned out for her 21st birthday, her parents had given her a red MGB. She was so excited she hopped in the car, took off, lost control, crashed into a telephone pole, and died instantly, shortly before the hospitalized man had the near-death experience. Nobody in the hospital knew the young woman was killed. Grayson cannot interpret this event as anything other than an after-death communication. Now, I want to present some of Mishlove's findings in regards to reincarnation. He writes, the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies now has a database of over 2,500 individual cases in which young children report former life memories. In that in roughly 1,700 cases, the information led to a deceased previous person's identification. I honestly don't understand why this information is not more widely reported and discussed. It seems to me this body of evidence alone is all that is needed to prove that consciousness survives our bodily death. Mishlove clarifies that the most solid reincarnation evidence comes from the totality of the 2,500 cases in the database, instead of from the strength of particular cases. Mishlove says he found patterns in the database. Some patterns found in the reincarnation database are culturally specific. Others are universal and apply across cultures. Birthmarks, physical features, and even deformities often conform to the previous person's death wounds. Sometimes the children begin to speak about their past life as soon as they start to talk. The main window of which these cases begin is 2 to 5 years of age. After a few years, the memories fade. The process is generally completed by late childhood, i.e. 5 to 8 years old. Only about a third of children retain past life memories into adulthood. Mishlove says, recollection is first person, not as if children were watching someone else in a movie. They feel as if their consciousness is continuous with their earlier lifetime they recall. It is personal and can be emotional, with fears and phobias carrying over from the former. Mishlove then introduces the concept of intermission memories, a time children remember between lives that share a lot of characteristics with near-death experiences. An afterlife existence between incarnations is reported in about 20% of reincarnation cases. These intermission memories are often like reports from near-death experiences, including communication with spirit guides and other deceased entities, Mishlove wrote. He cites a study from James Matlock, who studied the intermission time between lives and found that it varies by culture. However, the median time is 16 to 18 months from the death of the earlier identified life to the birth of the present life. In the West, however, this time extends to 35 years. Oddly, 80 to 90% of cases reported come from Asia. One particular case involves a concept referred to by Mishlove as announcing dreams. He writes, a Burmese wife whose husband was away from home on a long journey had a dream in which a deceased friend seemed to be asking for permission to be reborn as her child. She didn't like this proposal and in the dream told him not to come to them. When her husband returned from his journey, he told her that he had dreamed of the same old friend and had told him in his dream that the friend would be welcome to be reborn in their family. In due course, a child was born who later made statements suggesting that his father's acceptance had prevailed over his mother's attempted veto. His mother accepted the situation with good humor, characteristic of the Burmese. Another, more sinister concept that Mishlove writes about concerning the reincarnation realm is possession, or replacement reincarnation. He writes, possession in its most extreme form is also known as replacement reincarnation. A deceased person's spirit enters someone else's body, replacing permanently or temporarily the original personality. One interesting distinction between these cases and reincarnation is, in possession cases, the possessing personality's memory don't seem to fade over time. The replaced person's memories, however, seem to vanish. He admits that it's a rare phenomena, explaining that there have only been a few dozen documented cases. I find the idea unsettling. It's as if the possessing consciousness eliminates the original consciousness without discussion, permission, or consideration. It's the ultimate violation of a person's self. Can you imagine? I wonder if the possessed person feels as though they are slipping away bit by bit, confused as to where these new thoughts in their head are coming from, perhaps thinking they are losing their mind. Or is it instantaneous? 1 minute you're there and the next you are in a place similar to the intermission time Mishlove explains earlier. This thoroughly researched case, the case of Shiva Sumitra, may shed some light on it. Mishlove writes, Sumitra Singh was a woman living in India. She could barely read and write and had no formal schooling. In 1985, Sumitra, a married woman with children, began experiencing fits, going into altered states of consciousness and illness. She feared she would die. At one point, after she had stopped breathing and her body was cold, the family was told by a doctor she was dead. As the family was preparing for cremation, she revived. Upon reviving, she claimed her name was Shiva Tripathi. She claimed Shiva's sister-in-law had murdered her a few months earlier. She seemed to be an educated woman and she wanted to reconnect with her original birth family, the Tripathi family. The Singh family naturally didn't know what to make of this. This new personality, Shiva, didn't even recognize the Singh family members. Shiva was an individual who had apparently been murdered, died accidentally, or took her own life. They found her body on the railroad tracks after a quarrel with her in-laws. She was cremated quickly thereafter. 3 months elapsed before word of this strange occurrence reached Shiva's birth family. The Tripathi family sued Shiva's in-laws because they felt she had been murdered. Then the rumor reached them that in another village about 100 kilometers away, a possession was taking place involving their deceased daughter, so they arranged a visit. As soon as they arrived, Shiva hugged and kissed them, treated them warmly, and called them by their nicknames. She wanted to see her children and make sure they were being taken care of. Mishlove wrote that the new personality, Shiva's spirit, remained in the body until she died in 1998. In his paper, Mishlove overwhelms you with evidence demonstrating why he was the winner of Bigelow's contest. I skirted much of his paper dealing with physical and mental mediumship. I am going to explore these topics more in another video. I'm skeptical and want to spend some time with the content and research other opposing views. In closing, personally, I am all but convinced that our consciousness indeed survives our bodily death. Mishlove's work on the matter only serves to cement this belief. I am also convinced that the afterlife may be rife with danger. Mishlove presents more evidence than I could ever cover in a short video. I recommend you spend some time with this paper. It's an incredible read. I'm curious, have you personally had an experience, whether it be an NDE or after-death communication? Did you have memories of a different life when you were a child? Let me know in the comments section below. That's all for today. If you enjoy my content, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with a friend. I appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.